What's up, everyone? Taiki here. Welcome to episode 18 of the Crypto Market Wizards podcast. Today, I have here with me Zaheer. How are you doing today?
Doing well, man. How are you?
Yeah, so for those that don't know who you are, can you give us a brief background of how you got into crypto and what you do now?
So I got into crypto about 7 years ago. I work primarily on the liquid side. I run a fund called Split Capital. There we make liquid trades and investments on behalf of other clients. I've been doing this now for we launched in January of this year. We've been kind of running a similar strategy before this at a firm called Ledger Prime, where I was the portfolio manager for the firm.
Got it. So is your focus primarily in the liquid markets? Is it like, what would your split be? Like early angel investing versus liquid markets?
Yeah, 100% liquid. It's always been liquid, basically, more or less. I do personally angel invest, but that's like pretty few and far in between, generally.
Got it. So at the day of recording, April 30th, the markets are just red all around. What's your current read? What's your current read on the liquid markets? It seems like there's a lot of VC hate amongst or hate against the VCs. Uh, People call for like a meme coin super cycle and whatnot. Do you think it's just like short term narrative, or like how are you trading the markets right now?
Yeah, and there's like a few. You asked like three questions in one for what it's worth. So like they're all like pretty like loaded questions. I can't answer them like one
Yeah.
but I would say how are we thinking about the market? These are usually the spots where we start thinking about global markets, if you want to call it that, where it's like the regime in crypto is changing quite a bit. So we went maybe a couple months ago, we were buy and hold season, and now I think we're kind of moving into a little bit more of a trader's paradise, if you want to call it that. We have our own thoughts, and we're still kind of fleshing out where internally what we'll think about with markets. But I think as of right now, um, we're really cognizant of the fact that there's been quite a few times now the momentum has stalled, call it upper 60s, lower 70s, and it's not super inspiring. A lot of catalysts getting faded and a lot of new tokens coming to market. Emissions are still kind of not great. So overall, like everything kind of makes sense and why prices are nuking. Now the question just becomes, well, how long does this last, and where to from here, right? And then like on the other question about people hating VCs, I mean that's like a whole separate discussion that we can talk about at length.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of go on a tangent here, um, I guess the biggest token launch, or I guess the announcement of a token launch was Eigenlayer. There's a lot of anger, at least on the timeline. So if you just scroll through Twitter, there's a lot of. Let me just share my screen here. I just thought this was hilarious. Where I think Bank listed a stream, and if you just look at the comment section, it's just this is the biggest scam in history. Eigen scam, scam Eigen, boo this man boo. And I think the Bankless boys had to turn off the comment section during their live stream. Uh, like, what do you think of this Eigenlayer launch? Do you think the hate is justified? Do you think it was a good
No,
airdrop?
it's totally not. I mean, like it's the same. Like I've been saying this for months now, and not to be some like hindsight hero, but it's just very obvious. I mean, I've like have multiple tweets across the last like 9 months of people are down bad. Nobody really recovered from FTX. Most people just lost their money completely, and they tried to make it all back with meme coins, both in the summer and now. Um, and I think, yeah, exactly. And I've done this like multiple times. And it's the same thing, right? Like people are so angry because they're just down bad, which makes sense, right? Like I'm not saying that it's a fun reality, but ultimately, like the Eigen launch is irrelevant. It could have been any launch. It could have been any sort of situation, and I think people would have just dramatically had a different experience. And the funny thing is, like you and I both went to the same alma mater, and we both kind of studied very similar coursework, but our degrees were very heavily, kind of focused on behavioral finance in particular at Cal. And that's how I personally think about crypto, right? It's like the best kind of expression of psychology and markets, right? And it's not surprising that people feel this way. I understand, but at the same time, I don't think the Eigenlayer team did anything materially wrong. I think a lot of people have compared it to Starknet's launch, but Starknet was completely different. If people remember, right? Like they tried to vest 13% of the supply of the token within 2 months of launch, which is pretty egregious. and they actually changed and pivoted their stance after people complained within a day. Eigenlayer is not doing this. People just misinterpreted kind of their comms. People are mad about like the geofencing and things like that. But realistically, like this is kind of a work in progress, and like ultimately, when you're this large of a token launch, when you're this large of a protocol, like I think they could have done some things better for sure. But ultimately, like every three-letter agency in the world is kind of looking at you with what you're going to do with the token launch, and it will retroactively kind of come back and bite you in the ass pretty hard. So I can't really blame the Eigenlayer team for doing this. And then anyone who's kind of farming this in size, like you still made out pretty well, right? Even the
Yeah.
non-transferability piece, right? People like to talk about this. It's like, oh, it's non-transferable, all this nonsense. But realistically, like I genuinely think the Eigenlayer team like definitively just wants to make sure that they're setting a clean legal precedent. I don't think they care about stealing from token holders. Although I did see a good post basically saying they're at this point they can just kind of rug investors because ultimately like they don't really need to have this much stake TVL. But like I would be pretty surprised for this to kind of happen. It's just more of a function of markets than it is a function of Eigenlayer team doing well or not.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this in the past couple of weeks and months where every time there's a new token launch, it introduces so much FDV to the ecosystem where if the project or if the token needs to, I guess, maintain that price, people have to buy that token and they're most likely selling ETH or whatever asset that they're denominating in. Crypto doesn't have this infinite money printer. They can't just create new tokens and like have it be 100 billion FDV every single time, right? And I think I tweeted this yesterday too, where it's like people just want to be mad, right? People, like markets are down, they want to have a scapegoat, and they're like, oh, I can layer like screw this. I was expecting a six-figure drop, I only got like a 4 or 5 figure drop. Like you're at fault. But the truth is, there's $16 billion worth of liquidity on Eigen. It's basically impossible to generate that like enough yield to make everyone happy. And I think that's like one of the bear cases for Eigen, where I mean, they don't need this much ETH staked, right? They can probably function for like 10% of the TVL. And like, what do you think happens to all the ETH in Eigenlayer? Do you think this is the peak TVL, and we're going to just slowly trickle down here from here, or do you think that's just going to be like a temporary FUD event, and people are still going to be locked in for the implied points program or the yield?
Yeah, I think this kind of capital. I think there's quite a bit of people that are queuing up to leave as we speak, which makes sense. I think it's there's definitely like an overemphasis on how much value would come out of it. I mean, to your point, right? Like if Eigenlayer yields a 30% APR on $15 billion in capital, that's like such an insane return. Like people are like, I don't know what everyone wants, right? Like like full disclosure, like obviously we're in there as well, right? In some way, shape, or form. I'm like, that's still just such a sick yield, right? Like you like, what else could you possibly want on this large of a farm? Like, back in the 21, 22 days, like you weren't getting 30% on some farm that Alameda and like, Three Arrows and five different other, groups are putting in $5-10 billion. You're not getting that kind of value out of it. So ultimately, I mean, it's pretty great. It's pretty cohesive. Even the Pendle stuff turned out to be complete FUD too, right? So I genuinely don't understand the hatred towards the Eigenlayer team. But I think it underscores two things. Number one, which is launching at a specific time is very very important, and teams should really really consider this. It's not to time the market. It's just more so like you're working so hard at one goal that you just don't want to destroy so much enterprise value or goodwill. And people will remember these things as the event that transpired. So you could do everything right in 3 years time from now, but people will still mentally ascribe Eigenlayer with bad comms or whatever it is. So it is just important, and it's like kind of a layup to do this in the right way. And then ultimately on the other end too, with kind of the people that are trying to unstake, right? Like I there's not a lot of compelling farms that they could go to. Maybe Karak is like the natural next one. Butterfly yields are also still pretty good on PX ETH and APX ETH. So those kinds of yields, I think, will start being the biggest benefactors. I would say Butterfly, out of all of them, is probably the best one on Redacted Cartel. But yeah, that's kind of our view.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of takes on the timeline of like farming is dead. But in the past year, you can just bridge to any L2, wait a few months, get tokens, and in the meantime, ETH is appreciating. So it's not that bad if you think about it. Of course, everyone wants like 10k ETH and all the altcoins to pump to the Valhalla and whatnot. But I still think that we're not really in the market environment where alt season goes crazy and whatnot. Like, where do you think we are in the cycle? Do you think we're early, middle, late, somewhere in between? Like, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, just on the previous point too, right? It's kind of funny. Like in no other space would like a Series C, Series D protocol or project ever incentivize you to and give away like tokens, right? Like, sure, it's like the case in our space, but like, it's just it's insanity to me that people after FTX are still kind of in this mindset of, oh wow, I got rugged. It's like it's crypto, right? Like if you make something out of it, like amazing. But if you don't, like just let it go, right? Move on to the next thing, and like it doesn't need to be that angering, I would say. And then also ultimately on the other end too, it's like it's such an insane amount of entitlement, I would say, right? Like um, tokens protocols, they don't need to airdrop you anything realistically, right? Like in order for it to work. Sure, you could say that the meta works that like now that if you don't do an airdrop, your token won't do well, but like ultimately this is it's just such a great way to incentivize people to stay on, and I think people are still getting such an insane yield. And if you give it all to them in one clip, like what are they going to do? Of course, like you're trying to retain TVL, right? So the Eigenlayer founders aren't dumb either. To your follow-on question, where do I think we are in the cycle? I don't know. I don't. I would say historically, I don't really think about it in cycles, even though it's like been pretty teed up on a 4-year cycle. I would say ultimately, it's just more of a function of kind of global markets, if you want to call it that, where crypto either needs its own catalyst or capital injection, which it doesn't seem like we're getting anytime soon, or we need some sort of pretty optimistic kind of approach for why alternatives in crypto in particular should get a bid, which I have my own thoughts on. But it'll take time. But this is also why it's like you'll get much more of these kind of the tide goes out and then it pulls back in and then you see a lot of dead corpses on the beach kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess to ask more about your fund, what kind of strategies do you do? Do you do like pair trades? Do you just trade catalysts? Like, what's your main source to like generate edge and alpha?
Yeah, so we do everything. We'll do like literally anything that we can to generate money that's both ethical and legal. We well, I mean, you could
Ethical.
say something. All right, you could say something that's legal and then it's not ethical, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
within what we believe. But ultimately, our investors are very aligned with how we think about markets. I think um, crypto is a very dynamic game and it pays to be early to something. So we tell our investors, like, I don't know what will be a thing in 3 to 6 months from now. And that's not what I'm supposed to be good at. But when it's live and when it's there, we want to be the earliest ones to be a part of it. So it can be something as simple as eigenlayer farming, or it can be something as complicated as like, doing ribbon Avo, pair trades, things like that. Both of which we've done and have has done well. We also take shorts on the market as well. So kind of shorting into unlocks, things like that, repositioning our book. We're pretty active on derivatives, even though we have a kind of thesis-driven approach, mostly because derivatives are 10x more liquid, 10x more accessible. So we're able to kind of recreate the risk there for our portfolio. And ultimately, if you're running a liquid fund in any way, shape, or form, which literally every single fund in crypto does, if you're not doing something within the trading realm, like you're kind of just sitting on capital and hoping that like these multi-hundred vol assets aren't moving around and eviscerating your portfolio. So I think it's quite important to just be nimble in the space.
Got it. Yeah. Um, a lot of my audience, my viewers, they tend to be, I guess, like retail. And some people are second cyclers, third cyclers, maybe a small snippet for cyclers. How do you think they should be approaching the markets right now? Like you said, there's a lot of high FTV unlock tokens. Should retail be buying those things, or should they be looking to meme coins, or different types of markets? Like, how do you think, or like, what do you think is like the best way to, like, I guess allocate to the markets over like the next 6 to 12 months? I know
No,
it's a hard question.
no, fair enough, fair enough. I mean, no, it's not a hard question, right? It's just like it's a bitter answer, right? Which is stop gambling, right? Like, and I can say this repeatedly for years, and I have, right? And obviously nobody's going to listen, but like the only way to sustainably make money in a growth asset class, which crypto is, right? Like if you are betting on the outcome that crypto is going to grow in the next, call it 5 years, which almost everyone is, right? Or you're doing something drastically wrong in the space, and then B, like don't really have a discernible edge, or aren't really early into something, or don't have some sort of like informational, maybe not even informational, but uh, personal relationship edge with anyone in the space, then like stop playing the games that you're just that you're probably going to be bad at, right? Start playing the games that you think you can probably win, which is just buy the index, honestly, right? Like if you want crypto exposure, um, year to date, and you can pull this up too, if you want, like year to date, Solana has like underperformed against ETH, right? It's like one of those things where it's like, in the back of your mind, you're like, wow, Sol's done really, really well, right? But like in reality, it's actually, kind of underperformed. And you could say, well, maybe I sold the top and whatnot, but realistically, like these moves happen so much quicker than people think. And if you're a one man, shop and you're trading your own PA, like it can happen overnight, and you're down massively. And at that point, you're starting to think like, well, should I sell here? Should I wait? Maybe it's going to go back up, and then it goes down more, and so on and so forth, right? I would say like most of like kind of what we talked about earlier today, which was most of the reason why people are mad about Eigen is because they probably lost a bunch of money on meme coins, which is fair, right? It's kind of like this gold rush esque experience where you're like, wow, like the potential of making a lot of money is so appealing that you're willing to kind of forego a bunch of risk, and then it like pukes out, and then you're like, wait, wow, like all this like paper P&L that I had is now substantially lower, right? And I just down bad on these things, right? So again, I'm not saying like don't participate in meme coins and don't be in the markets for these things, but it's ultimately like do you have material edge in these spaces, and are you actually good about selling? Because if you don't sell, you can't play, and that's like I'll mention this a few times on podcasts. Hopefully, like if you don't sell, you cannot play.
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, I had someone like his name was Messi on, and his biggest takeaway was like you have to enjoy selling in crypto because if you don't sell, then you can't really rotate, and crypto tends to go down like really really fast under the wrong conditions, I suppose. And in crypto, people when people buy tokens, they're buying the dream, right? They buy this coin. It's like, oh my god, like what if it pumps? But if you sell, you're selling the dream, which is really really hard to do. How do you get better at selling? Do you have any, I guess, lessons or like wisdom that you can share to, I guess, like be more humble in the markets?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can tell you what we talk to investors about, right? Like, there's a lot of times when people are like, okay, well, selling a growth asset class is dumb because it's going to grow and all these things. But it's like, look, you can either accept one of two realities. Number one, it's either you can say, well, this space is going to grow up materially across multi years, and I'm just going to buy and sell, but buy BTC, ETH, and Sol or whatever it is, right? Realistically, you're not doing that, right? Like nobody's doing that, right? Like very few people who are just buying and holding and not looking at the price of their asset. If you can do that, fantastic, go do it, right? But if you want to kind of be more savvy, then like it's like a muscle, right? You have to flex the muscle and train it in order for you to get better at it, right? Um, a lot of our a lot of our investors kind of and I had a conversation with Fisky about this on Twitter actually, Fiskantis from Sigil Fund and Z Prime,
Yeah.
um, and if you're not constantly flexing the muscle of selling, you're not going to get that spot where it's the market top and you need to kind of get out of position. Nobody knows when the market tops, right? Nobody has a clue when this is going to happen, and you won't know until well into the future, right? So you're going to go back and use some hindsight to be like, well, that was the market top, right? And it was so obvious and yada yada. But like realistically, the only way to get out of that position is if you're like, okay, I don't like this condition, I'm going to sell here, and I'll look to rebuy. If it goes up, great, that's fine. But if not, then I can rebuy at some point. So, realistically, the way that we trade these cycles historically is that, once we sell the asset down, we're not just like, okay, now we're out forever and we know it's a bear market, it's going to be great. We'll probably rebuy at some position lower, right? And then resell and rebuy and resell and rebuy, right? And you have to do it in some way like that. Otherwise, you're just purely gambling, or you're kind of, doing some sort of magic hocus pocus nonsense, right? So, it's like you got to just be kind of practical about how you do these things, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people they just or people like they just like buy stuff and then they want to just sell the top. But that like, if you think you're going to do that, then you're just way too overconfident in like our abilities. So maybe it's best to just start like selling here and there, train that muscle, be okay with it, be okay if it goes higher, be like be happy if it goes lower, and then once it actually is near the actual market top, then maybe like all that practice that you've had maybe in 2024 can actually pay off later this year or sometime in 2025. Is
Right.
that kind of how like you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say even, to add to that, right? Like the number one thing I see people doing is like comparing different kind of styles, right? Which is you know yourself the best, right? And you know how you kind of think about markets, and you just have to ask yourself, like, okay, like, what is my goal here? If I'm trying to make a ton of money, then like that's fine, but you have to also be willing to take an L from time to time. And then if it's just like, okay, I need to steadily make money and I need to kind of grow this over time, then I'm gonna wait for the market to kind of develop in the way that I think is best, right? Um, so that's our approach, right? Which is I know I'm not here to hit a home run on like a 3 month, 6 month time horizon, but instead, like if I can consistently outperform and consistently sell before other people, then like I'm in good shape, and I think that makes all the difference. This is something that like Nale, on Twitter says pretty often, which is, what do you think your expectation is if you start off with 500 grand this year, in call it 6 months, right? And he puts some various range of how much you think, how much the average person thinks they can make. But it's a really good exercise to ask yourself, like, what am I trying to accomplish in this market? Am I trying to 10x my money? Or am I trying to consistently just make some good trades and some good investments and cycle that back into, investments that I have a belief in or cash or whatever it is, right? So your expectation should match what your reality is, right? Again, going back to the Eigen thing, like I'm pretty sure the majority of the reason why people are bitter is because they lost money on meme coins that they thought they were going to make a ton more on, and maybe Eigenlayer would help lick those wounds that they had. But realistically, we've been very very easily able to find out that that's not how this stuff works, right?
Yeah, and time to pivot to an audience question. I guess while we're talking about the topic of Eigenlayer, but like, do you think it's like over for the airdrop meta? Because the airdrops have been like a pretty strong narrative this cycle. Do you think airdrops will continue being a strong narrative, or like, do you think the market will look somewhere else? Like, what do you think about airdrops and points and whatnot?
Usually what ends up happening is that the new meta in crypto doesn't really dissolve until something better kind of comes along. It'll be less relevant, but I don't think it'll be completely gone. Um, and there's still a lot of quality projects that will kind of tokenize in the next, call it, 3 to 6 months. Um, but I think there's a more interesting kind of underlying question of, well, why did they all decide to tokenize at the same time, right? Which I think it's a good question to ask yourself.
Got it. And like, would you say your strategy is just opportunistic, like short to medium term? I guess like buying majors. You don't really like do you dabble on chain aside from I guess like restaking and bridging ETH. Like yeah, like
Yeah, we'll do anything that makes money. Yeah, we'll do anything that makes money, within reason again, right? And we'll liquidity adjust for these things, right? We're not buying like some sub $10 million like shitcoin. But I would say it's very regime dependent, right? So comparing 9 months ago or 10 months ago to today is like a very drastically different market, right? And we change our view based on kind of how the market expands and moves, right? So 9 months ago, 12 months ago, that was a time when you could be consistently buy and hold, right? And like you don't have to think about it all that much. Whereas now it's like, okay, now you're seeing a good bit of fall in asset prices, so you need to kind of change your strategy to match that a little bit more, right? When your high water mark is now moving around quite a bit, it's kind of a problem, right? So that's kind of how we think about it. It's very regime dependent, um, but we'll play different games in different environments that we think that are advantageous to us.
yeah. What are some games right now that you think is advantageous for your particular fund, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I think new token launches are pretty interesting for us. I think a lot of like on-chain projects or finding yield where other people can't or don't really realize it. I think people are pretty lazy still, um, and they're not really kind of going out there and trying a bunch of things. I think everyone's kind of waiting for the market to come to them, and I think there's this broken mentality of waiting for retail, but like retail never came, right? Realistically, so ultimately, like you can't put your own uh, kind of thoughts on what the market should be. Instead, you just got to kind of listen and see what is everyone else doing and how do I make the most of what I can get, right? Um, if retail comes, great, then let them come, and we can profit in that kind of environment. But until then, like we don't see any signs that that's happening. If institutions come, great, right? Realistically, we don't see any of that happening on the direct allocation side. So they'll buy BTC and whatnot, but they're not buying. They're not buying into funds. They're not buying direct, kind of secondaries. They're not buying a ton of late venture or anything like that. So um, yeah, it's just like you kind of piece together what you can when you see it in front of you.
Yeah. So is your read that right now the markets are relatively PvP, where we don't have the PvE aspect of retail, just like buying everything and anything, and you really have to be savvy to, I guess, pick your spots. And maybe it's best to sit out, for some time if you don't really have anything that's like super obvious.
Yeah, I mean this is a great point, right? Which is like you can be in the quote unquote wrong asset and get fleeced, right? Completely. Arbitrum is down like almost more than 50% in the last month and a half or so. Um, this is a big problem, right? Like, and then there's a lot of assets that aren't, right? So it's just very obvious that there's not a lot of new capital coming into the space, at least on the alt side in particular. And until that changes, like you got to be a little bit more nimble. And I'm not here to preach to everyone else and not acknowledge our own kind of missteps in this, right? Like it's easy to get caught up in the narrative and also be long something that goes against you. So the market is deceivingly more difficult than it's showing itself to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I guess like just if you just scroll through like crypto Twitter, everyone's like really really angry, and I think that's kind of reflective of the difficult environment we're in. How do you manage emotions? Because like you said earlier, we took the same classes at Berkeley. I guess behavioral finance, like economics and whatnot. I think crypto especially is all about psychology. It's like a lot of people compare themselves to others, but at the end of the day, you're just battling like, against yourself, right? Do you have any lessons for, I guess, our audience on like how to best approach markets in terms of like mentality? If you can share any of
Yeah, I mean, you just lose enough money at some point where you're just like, okay, well, this absolutely sucks, right? Like,
that.
um, people don't know this, but like, I lost my job and like a decent portion of my money on in one day in 2022 because of FTX. So we did nothing wrong, but like the market just takes it away from you, right? Like we were positioned like super well and everything was great, but at the same time, like our parent org was FTX US and it just killed us, right? So um, you can do everything right and still end up in a bad position, and you could do everything wrong and still end up in a good position. So um, you just got to take it in stride and understand that like literally none of this is like people always say like I deserve this or I should have gotten this or whatever. Um, I don't believe in that at all. Like I totally believe that I deserve nothing, and that if I get it, I should just be grateful for that. And if I don't, then it is what it is, right? You're not guaranteed an outcome just because you're a part of something.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I guess like one question that I always ask my guests is like, who are your investing heroes? A lot of people have different types of heroes, whether it be like Druckenmiller and whatnot. But who do you look up to this space or in the markets? And like, what have you learned from like those traders slash investors?
Um, yeah, I would say. I mean, it's hard, right? There's a few people. I would say like um, Jawad Mian from Stray Reflections is probably like the guy from TradFi that I look to the most and read the most content from. He runs Stray Reflections, which is a podcast and publication. And he was like the only person that was vocally bullish in 2022 when markets were bottoming. He was just like, we're going to run a secular bull market, and he was like totally vindicated. And it's not just like the shot calling; it's just more like someone who's able to kind of be very, very honest intellectually about his own positioning, how he thinks about market, how he thinks about um, like his own analysis, and not really reading too much into what everyone else is doing, which I think sometimes I have a habit of doing, even though I realize it's like mostly nonsense. Yeah, I would also, I mean, some of the guys I respect a lot in the crypto space, just in terms of being able to play at like a consistently high level. Obviously, it's GCR, but I wouldn't even say it's like, he's not some prophet or anything like that. I would say it's just more so having, you know, an insane amount of conviction in the plays that you're making. And then Sue as well, I would say is like, just an elite kind of, markets guide. What people don't realize, especially when you trade size over time, is that like a lot of it just boils down into feel, and like some of it is just like God given, and you just literally can't do anything about it. Like you just kind of are, or you're not, and like you can't really learn to do more. And I think just how he was just putting up numbers in 21 and 20, which is unbelievable. Um, so there's a lot that you can glean, and obviously people are like, okay, well, he did a bunch of stuff and super negative, which I can understand obviously, but it's also like take the good of what you can from other people, and you don't have to necessarily clump it all together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned something about Stu. Like, do you ever do any like field trades? Because I think a lot of people they're more analytical and they're like, okay, like, here's a support line, whatever. But sometimes you just gotta pound the button, right? You just gotta slam the button because you just feel it in your veins. How important do you think is, I guess, instinct, a natural instinct to you?
It's super important, right? Like, I mean, ultimately, like you are a primate that's like you're trying to make investment decisions, right? Like, it's hard, right? Like you said, it's all emotional, right? It's just like when it actually sucks the most, and you're just like, I want to cut it all and like just walk away. It's like usually the time to start buying, right? And when it's like, wow, I feel like a genius, we need to up the ante and all this other nonsense, and you're like, you should probably get out of risk, right? So, feel is a huge part of it, and this is something that like people don't understand. Like we tell our investors, it's funny enough, like we always tell our investors like um we don't like losing money, not for the reason that you think, which is obvious, like nobody wants to lose LP capital, but it's more so from the field perspective, which is when your psyche goes from, hey, I need to make a bunch of money for everyone, to, oh my god, please let the price go back up so I can break even. That's like a drastically different environment, right? Like in TradFi, you lose 20-30% of your fund. Like you just close down because you realize like your fund is in death spiral, right? Um, it's the same thing in crypto, but people don't want to wake up to the reality, right? Like if you lose drastically, like in crypto, like it just kind of kills you, right? Like you're mentally not thinking about I need to go out, perform, and make the best decision I can. It's like, please let me get back to break even so I can start collecting fees again. So it
Yeah,
is
yeah.
all just about feel at the end of the day, right? And you can make you can have empirical kind of evidence in order to make a decision, but like it's very difficult to kind of strip yourself of that of the feeling of whatever it is that you have going on in your day to day.
Yeah, and I think Light Crypto said this in an Up Only podcast last cycle, where at the end of the day, with crypto, you're trading humans, you're trading human emotion. What you see in the chart is like how you're feeling right now. Probably everyone isn't feeling that great right now, and no one's feeling that great. And then you scroll Twitter, everyone's bearish, or they're like, "Oh yeah, like what if we go to 50K? Like we're all fucked." But you know, you do have to be aware of the psychological games where markets go down, everyone's bearish. Markets go up, everyone's bullish. So it's really, really, really hard to, I guess, be on the other side because we are social creatures. We want to buy when others are buying. We want to sell when others are selling. How do you try to be a contrarian? Like, would you say that your trades are like trading style is contrarian, or are you like more of a momentum trader? How would you describe your trading style?
I wouldn't really box it into one thing. I think you have to do all these things, otherwise it's kind of like you're not really developing. Which it's always funny, like when we have calls with prospective LPs or whatever, they're just like, what's your strategy? What's this? What's that? It's like, oh, you kind of have to do everything, otherwise you're like, you're going to be kind of sidelined. But I think ultimately, it's just it's just the truth, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you go read like AQR's like investment pitch for most of their funds, like, uh, they have like a million and one strategies that they kind of run, right? And like you ask them, like, well, well, what is it, right? And it's like, well, like how much time do you have, right? Like, and so I can explain to you how we think about an investment decision. Um, yeah, like ultimately, like you're just trading against other people, and like how you act day to day is also going to just impact how you make investment decisions, right? So you're down bad, you're feeling burnt out, whatever it is, and it's gonna reflect in the trading performance as well. And conversely, it's the same thing. This is why you have to like also make sure like different aspects of your own life uh, are kind of hitting the right points. And this is even like ritualistic, right? Like you have to believe in something, otherwise you're going to be like canned pretty quick, right? It's like the guys who like abstract money out too far, like generally speaking, don't. Uh, it doesn't really hit. as much for them, right? Like it has to be more than just the money, I think.
Yeah. Like, how do you avoid things like burnout? Because even for me, I don't really run a fund. I'm just like a mid-curve retail pleb. But even then, like, I stare at the charts and I'm like, oh my god, like I'm so exhausted. Like even recording this podcast and like past podcasts, I'm like, oh, it takes a lot of work. How do you remain optimistic? How do you remain a perpetual optimist? How do you not just not want, like, not hang up the cleats and say fuck it, I'm gone? How do you believe in yourself and I guess not burn out?
Yeah, I mean, like, geez, I didn't know it was gonna be that bad to be on the podcast, man. Like,
Oh, no, 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 no. Okay, okay.
no,
It's less of the podcast. It's more about like other things I have to manage, but like, uh,
no, fair
and like
enough, fair
everything
enough.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm human too, right? Like I say perpetual optimist, but like there's obviously gonna be days when it's not there, right? But it's like it's not about like always being like happy and always being like optimistic and but it's just how quickly can you get back to that state is the only thing that matters. So it's like resilience, right? Um I went to a high school that was very bad at the students were very bad with resilience. It's like one of these like pressure cooker schools in the Bay Area. I went to a university where most kids like had bad resilience, right? So just over time, like you just kind of have to start building resilience. And for me, it's always been through faith, but even more so in the last, call it, a couple of years. If you don't believe in something, I think you'll just burn out pretty quickly. Um, and like anyone who's made like any money in markets can tell you this very quickly. Like um, the utility of money is like pretty like logarithmically curves out. Um, so if you're just doing it for money, like the meaning will go away pretty quickly. Um, so it has to be something more than just that. Faith to me is like the number one driver of this, and like ultimately, like in anyone that we kind of bring on the team, anyone that we want to work with, like they have to be like even LPs, right? They have to believe in something more than just I need to make more money tomorrow. Um, yeah,
Got it. Yeah, speaking of fate, I actually got a few questions around, like for example, like Mr. B Smiley here. well, I'm just gonna read this out loud because
sure.
I'm like, as a fellow Muslim, I would love to hear your opinion on intersectionality between Islamic finance and DeFi, especially on lending, borrowing, staking, and their respective rates yield and how they relate in his view with. I don't even know how to say this, but I guess like how
It's
does
user, yeah, yeah.
faith, yeah, how does faith like tie into, I guess, like religion and crypto? Like, are,
Yeah.
are there any, are there any intersections? And yeah, like just generally talk about, I guess, this particular question here.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this like at length. Probably not the best venue to do this, but personally, I think that there's a lot of it's very intertwined between Islam and crypto in particular. Um, but I think with regards to like Sharia compliance, like I think the most important aspect is just like this is the first market where you could deposit as a depositor and collect halal yield via stablecoins, which works pretty well because you're not collecting interest rates on stable, so it's pretty unique. And I think there's a lot of like, and this is like one of the core reasons why I joined crypto to begin with. I thought that like if you're redefining money, then you could do it in a much better way. It's pretty easy to determine that like high interest rates are like extremely predatory from people, and if you can kind of neutralize high interest rates, then it becomes pretty easy to understand why it's very advantageous for the world. Um, but I think with regards to a lot of the different technicalities of this stuff, like I have my own personal beliefs, and I don't want to like infringe on what someone else has to say. Nor am I an Islamic scholar, but I've spent a lot of time on this stuff, and I think overall, like um, your intention matters more than a specific kind of uh, action in a protocol. Or some such, right? Like, how do you define usury is kind of more complicated than well, it's just an interest rate. Like, and to me, it's like about a high interest rate. It's like definitively, predatory towards other people. But that could differ with someone else. Yeah, man, I was hoping these faith questions would be more interesting, but whatever. It is what it is, man.
well, like, let me try a new one. Let me try this one. Mr. Inverse Kobe. So not Kobe, but I love his handle, long year longs. But I guess you do trade perps, right? As a Muslim,
Yeah.
like what are the issues that he talks about? Is it, yeah? Can you like just talk about, I guess, just the first question in particular?
Yeah, I mean, so again, in Islam, you can't basically have you can't collect usury or participate in it, which usury is defined as like high interest rates, right? So that
Mhm.
usually leads to some sort of like extreme, like basically like what are they called? Going to a loan shark and collecting like a really insane kind of
Got it.
yield. That's how I define it. But ultimately, obviously, there's a interest rate embedded in a perpetual swap, right? Um, I have my own kind of thoughts and philosophies on this stuff. It's kind of like if you even operate in any sort of Western environment or globally, in any country, Muslim or not, like you are embedded in the interest rate environment regardless. Like your currency is attached to it, your 401k is attached to it, like everything you do is attached to it. So it's like, where do you draw the line? It's like a more interesting question. I'm not saying that that's like a clean solution, but it's like there's more questions to ask than this. And then also on perpetual swaps, again, it's like, what's your rationale? Like, if I pay like 10x the price on spot for the same order type, like, I don't think that's a better solution than not playing in perpetuals. And any sort of interest derived income that I kind of receive, both personally and through the fund, I kind of repurpose in a way that I think is pretty legitimate. So we don't do any sort of kind of direct lending with the USDC or USDT that we have, both in the fund and also as personally. We'll try to find more creative solutions than just kind of getting interest income, if that makes sense.
Got it. So I guess airdrop farming is perfect, right? Because you can just deposit
Yeah,
assets.
this is why crypto's sick, right? Like, because you get you're actually doing an action more than just lending money to someone else, right? You're taking an embedded risk on the smart contract that the thing won't run, right? Um,
Mhm.
you can get around this stuff like pretty easily, which is nice. And I think we're also realizing very quickly in crypto how predatory a lot of loan markets are globally, um, especially for emerging markets. It's like pretty bad, right? It's not great.
Mhm. Yeah. Like, just curious, like, what are you farming right now aside from Eigenlayer?
What am I farming right now? It probably doesn't matter anymore, but we took a look at like Morpheus AI. That was an interesting one for us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What else? What else? What else? Um, Redacted Cartel doing like butterfly staking. Nothing crazy there. We did some mantle stuff too. That was the Eigenlayer stuff. Um, but yeah, not a ton on yielding assets, especially after Eigenlayer. Like we're probably rethinking this part of our book now. But yeah, we obviously always like to have our assets yielding something, right? Maybe we'll probably be in the butterfly PXE uh, farms as well. It'll be the highest yielding LSD. Um, and then if they kind of go the LRT model too, that'll be pretty interesting. I think they launched with Karaka already, so that'll be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think they also launched a mode network where you can just bridge PXE, earn the yield, and get like, mode points. Just points everywhere. Um, like,
Yeah,
what,
it's
what?
it's it's definitely more interesting, I think, on Redacted Cartel Butterfly. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing about Morpheus that you mentioned, I'm not personally farming it, but I think the idea is you can, take stake deed, put it in this protocol, and the staking yield will be used to buy the token. Like aside from Morpheus, like what do you think about crypto and AI? I feel like that's like a huge, sector that people are looking into. A lot of people think it's vaporware, but people buy because it's vaporware because scams pump the hardest and like all that stuff. But like, do you think AI and crypto makes sense, or do you think it's just like this random narrative that people are just throwing money at?
Oh man, it's so funny. It's like sometimes like investors listen to these podcasts, both existing and new ones, and it's always funny because it's like I just never want to lie about these things and like like ultimately like I couldn't tell you what like the AI narrative is going to be on any of these things in the long run, but ultimately this is how crypto trades, right? Like, and we're fiduciary fiduciarily responsible for our investors to make money. So. Um, Ultimately, like we have to kind of play along with this. I think crypto AI is going to continue to grow, so long as AI continues to grow. Um, and you're pretty quickly able to determine why we're interested in AI.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess with Morpheus, you just take your ETH, stake it, you get some tokens, maybe you'll dump it. It's there's so many ways to earn yield right now. It's not like a million percent APY. It's not like the Pontonomics that we saw with DeFi 2.0 last cycle, but I still think farmers are eating good. there's so many opportunities, don't you think?
People are so they have it too good in crypto. Like, even if you did cash and carry basis on like 12%, like that's so insane if you think about it. Like you're getting free money, man. Like what else do you want? Like the the LST yield already is so high. Like on in kind, like and you get convexity on the upside too. Like what else do you want? I don't get it. I don't know. Uh, I think people are so addicted to making money in an up only manner, but like that kind of money making, like theoretically, probably doesn't exist in the same way. And if it does, then it has a ton of embedded risk that other people aren't willing to underwrite, right? Like if you're making a ton of money, usually it happens from the fact that like you're taking on a lot more risk than you think,
Hmm.
generally. You know.
Yeah. How do you manage risk? Because I think, with crypto, people don't really price in the risk of ruin because, if you buy something and it keeps going up, it's like, oh yeah, like this is great. But then one day you wake up, it's down 80% and you're like, fuck, like that was risky. But like, do you have any like risk management tips that, I think our audience can learn from? Like, I guess like personally with your fund, etc.
Yeah, I mean, like we obviously like never try to have like single kind of key man risk on any sort of exchange or trade or wallet or anything like that. So in that way, like the damage is minimized. Buying insurance products, things like that. Obviously to appease investors. Um, yeah, I mean, ultimately, like just if it depends on how you think you can make money, and like everyone, I don't think anyone in the world can say, well, I make money hitting home runs. Like if you just consistently do one thing good, like sorry, like one thing well, like just keep doing that one thing and don't try to like ruin it by taking on like infinite size on it. Yeah, it really is just dependent on how you think you can make money. If you're making money in a way that like you're consistently hitting like singles and doubles and you're trying to do your best like with these farms or whatever it is, just like keep doing those things and don't like try to like tilt the leverage in your favor and do the most and I think in a growth asset class the asset beta itself is going to do incredibly well, hopefully. So you don't need to really like push the limits on trying to make a ton of money. Um, and instead, you should just focus on like, okay, how do I make sure that my risk of ruin is not massive, right? So things like making sure you have like different wallets, exchanges, like not like if one position goes against you, one exchange goes, becomes insolvent, one wallet gets hacked, whatever it is, then it's not detrimental to your overall kind of existence. And again, like this is stuff like you have to learn time and time again, right? Like the best of people in our space have gotten hacked and lost tons of money and lost been in bankruptcy court and been in all kinds of situations. So um, these things can and will happen. So just plan for it every single day.
Yeah, you don't want to plan for it after you get rugged, right? I think a lot of
Yeah.
people buy a hardware wallet after they get rugged, but you need to buy a hardware wallet if you're even like farming, um, even like four figures or like five figures of capital in crypto. Um, you mentioned, I guess, singles, doubles, home run trades. Like what are characteristics of home run trades? And can you talk about any trades in the past that like did really well for you? Whether it's like high convexity trades. Can you just like talk about how to find like or how to like look for these opportunities?
Um, I haven't looked at they just happen, right? Like that sometimes it happens through conversation, sometimes it happens through like you know uh, intros, but a lot of times it just happens in the open market and someone else is talking about it and they don't take it. The lock sold trade was a pretty interesting one at $64 or whatever it was. I think a lot of people took advantage of it, and I think it was a very interesting trade because it's like there's a lot of philosophizing behind it, but realistically, like it was an amazing trade for anyone who took it, right? So that's like a home run trade in my opinion that like a lot of people just didn't want to take on. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of times when people want home run trades, but they also want home run exits right away. But like you can't have both usually, right? It's a home run trade because not a lot of people are paying attention to it, and it'll take time for it to develop, right? Very seldom do you have home run trades where you can price it quickly, and you can get liquidity on it, and that usually happens at major market dislocations. But that's happened in a while. So another one was like selling your FTX claim. There's like I'm obviously like I'm obviously like, showing my own kind of theses that I've had in the past, but um, that was another one, right? That was like pretty obvious that like, as soon as the estate started allowing people to transfer claims, like those claim dollars would come back to the market and that would bail out the market. So um, this was September, October of last year. It's a pretty home run trade to long Sol on this thesis as well. Um, yeah, things like that. It's just like once they come up, right? Like those USDC dislocations were pretty obvious, I think, when prices were trading down, and there's like a bunch of USDC insolvency fears. Um, yeah, a lot of asymmetric bets are usually just like the ones to kind of take on. A lot of times when ETH is like being flooded from the top, highs to the lows, usually those end up being maybe not home run trades, but they end up being pretty great trades.
Yeah. I guess you just always have to be paying attention, and eventually you will run into just cool opportunities, and you just have to take it one at a time. I know you've been a vocal bull for Solana, and I saw this meme today that I thought was like pretty funny, where Ethereum is becoming more of a VC chain than Solana ever was. Like, what are your takes on, I guess, this particular narrative, and I guess like the whole Sol versus ETH narrative? Like, how do you think both assets perform for the next 12 months?
Yeah, I'm like quite optimistic on Ethereum. I think Sol has had its run, like the majority of its run, and I think people are like coping pretty hard. Like we wrote three investment memos in December 2022, Synapse, Sol, and Lido. All three realized very quickly, but Sol was the one that we sized the hardest and had the most conviction behind. Obviously, um, it also did the best, I think. And pretty matter of factly, I think for Solana, it's a pretty straightforward narrative, right? That like was severely mispriced because of the estate and the liquidation and selling. But at the same time, I think much of that kind of outperformance has happened, and I think people are expecting a little too much. And nothing really goes up in a straight line. So, I think people need to kind of temper their expectations a little bit. Um, I think, Sue had a good tweet, I believe this was a few weeks ago, where he said something like, the only interesting thing from ETH, BTC, and Sol, kind of like relative ratios is like which token to kind of denominate your portfolio in. And I think that's a really good way to think about it, right? Like I don't need to be dogmatic about why I love ETH and why I love Sol, even though I'm like obviously I'm a big ETH guy personally. Um, but I don't need to be dogmatic about it in order to make a investment decision. I just see what's in front of me and see if I can price it the correct way.
Yeah, I think people have this, or I think one psychological, or one observation I made is that you know with Solana, right? Solana pumps a lot, and then people just keep expecting it to go up a lot, and people saw big airdrops, and people continue to expect big airdrops, but you can't keep expecting the same thing over and over again, because if everyone expects it, then everyone piles in, and it's diluted, and then everyone's upset. Uh, I guess the expectations versus reality, I think is very, very important in crypto, and that's why I think most events in crypto tend to be seldom news. Do you agree, or like, what do you think about? I guess how to remain humble and like not, you know, like bandwagon like some of like the most popular trades out there.
Yeah, I mean, like I think it just depends. It's like time frame dependent, right? I think it is seldom news in the sense that like usually when there's a ton of like hype around an event, like, and it doesn't hit immediately, or it doesn't have like a coin flip outcome of like an immediate kind of impact, like those are usually bad events. Like Chem Karsan from I forgot what's the fund is called now. Is it Aegea, something like that? He would talk about this in 2020 and 2021, where after every single FOMC meeting, markets would react in one way or another, but ultimately, like it would just get sold off, and like prices would revert. The vol would get sold off, and like because there was so much event vol that would come off into these like prints, into these like events, like nothing would really happen, and prices would get kind of pinned. It's the same thing in crypto, right? Like there's so much anticipation for something to happen, but like realistically, like nothing really happens that immediately. That could be that drastic. That's telegraphed ahead of time, you know. So usually the positioning, like you need to take it off beforehand. Um, there's another question that you asked at first behind this.
No. I think you answered most of it. But I think one thing I've observed is that with like EIP 4844, like OP and ARB topped like a month before the event. Chapella, Lido topped 1 or 2 months before the event. It's fast, smart money. They know how to play these games. And by the time everyone's showing it on Twitter, it's probably in the seventh or eighth inning.
Yeah, yeah, totally fair.
Yeah. And I guess like one last question I have for you is I think a lot of people watching this, they have, a reasonably sized portfolio, but they want to make it. So like, how do you advise people to make it? Let's say, from 5 figures ish to 7 figures. Like, what do you think is like the best path for them to take um, over like the next couple of years?
Yeah, and this was actually in your first question too, which is like expectation versus reality, right? I remember this distinctly in 2021. Um, I was doing quite well, and I asked Dan from CMS. I was like, "Oh, like, what do you think?" This was like February or so of 2021. So, what do you think about markets? He's like, "Oh, like BTC just ran, now ETH will run, and then Alts will run, and then it's going to be over." And I remember when he told me this, I was like almost annoyed at him. I was like, why? Like, why do you think so? Like, no, I think it'll keep going. All this stuff. He's like, this is just how it works, right? Um, Obviously, I don't think it's that simple anymore, but I don't think he would say that either. But it's more so, this reality that like everyone wants to think that this outcome can happen in perpetuity, but the realistic scenario is that like it just doesn't work like that, and you kind of have to like pick and choose your shots over time, and you have to sell. Like again, like if you don't sell, you can't play, right? So, uh, in the same way, like if you're not constantly changing your positioning, like over time, you're not going to be able to kind of exit in the market environment that you want to. And for anyone who wants to quote unquote make it, like again, like figure out the games that you're good at, right? Like, um, this doesn't mean go and like start learning how to insider trade from different people and like getting quote unquote alpha, all this other nonsense. But realistically, it's just you want to. Um, you want to be in the kind of games that you think you can consistently do. And again, in a growth asset class, you don't need to do a whole lot. You just have to survive and grow slowly and steadily over time. And you'll realize you'll outperform most people just by doing that. And the market will present opportunities for you to kind of place big bets, right? Um, I remember distinctly in 2020 when Bitcoin broke its all-time high. I was in the office at the time and I was just like, man, like that's it, huh? Like I don't have any more edge. And like my friend was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, there's no more price action history, right? Like from the past to be able to determine like, what will happen. He's like, are you kidding me? Like you just keep going. Like there's no, there's no stopping. And I think that's a really good way to think about it, right? It's just like you can kind of grow with the market as it comes to you, and you take it one step at a time. You don't need to put like your predictions in it right away, right? And to the comment from that I made earlier, right, which is when Dan told me like it's going to be over at some point, right, and some point soon. I was annoyed because in my head I had like some fantastical vision of, well, I need to hit X amount before Y time because otherwise I'll be upset. But that's not how it works, right? You don't get to force yourself onto the market. And I think usually when you do that, that's when you start making the worst decisions. That's when you start losing money because you're trying to squeeze something out of the market that just doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, trade the market's for what it is, not what you want it to be. And I think
Right,
everyone gets wrecked when they tell themselves, "All right, just one more 2x and I'll sell." Right? Every
right,
time people say that to themselves, it's over. Because
right.
then people go out the risk curve, and then like no one buys the majors, they buy some shitcoin, and there's not enough bid in the majors, and everything just nukes.
Right. And if you don't sell, you can't play. And the reason why this is important is because if you don't sell, you can't come around the next time around when there's some market inefficiency, right? You just need to consistently be playing, right? If you don't do that, like you're just not going to exist, and that's that, right?
Yeah, I think there's the tweet from XMNGR where uh, in discretionary, the best position is flat, and then you just ape into like the 5 best opportunities per year, and then you outperform. But obviously, a lot of people don't do that because we want to gamble. We want to be in the markets and do stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, totally. People always ask me like, "What's your best advice for what do you want to hold and whatnot?" And it's just like, well, you don't want to really hear it, right? Because I'll just tell you, go buy Bitcoin, ETH, and Solana, right, or some variation of that, and nobody really wants to do it, right?
yeah,
Um, Yeah, and even to our own investors, right? Like they want a diversified pool of assets and like outperformance and portfolio mitigation. That's why they park their money with us. So, um, it's a very difficult game, and I think people expect it to be a lot easier than it is. But usually, the people who kind of sell it as, "Oh my God, crypto's so soft, it's so easy," have like either some sort of insider trading or some sort of uh, you know uh, KOL status that sells it as if it's easier than it is, but it's not. It's very difficult.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Well, thank you for your time, Zahir. Do you have any final words of wisdom, advice that you have for our audience today that you think they'll benefit from?
Yeah, I would say like the most important thing is just like you gotta find something in your life that like genuinely matters to you. For me, that's faith. For me, that's Islam. And like, if you don't find something that you actually care about outside of doing this stuff 24/7, like the money will mean absolutely nothing for you. I was in Dubai, call it 2 weeks ago, and I had, met a bunch of friends and spent a bunch of time with people that like living it up, having a lot of money, all this stuff, but like couldn't be more depressed, right? So, you got to have something that you actually genuinely are looking forward to, and that centers you daily, not every week, not every month, like daily. It has to be every single day.
Yeah, I think mental health is very important too, because if you're not at the top of your game, then like how can you expect to make money? It's not sustainable. So yeah, always have something in the real world separate from crypto that you can, I guess, latch onto to keep believing in that the future is better, and that's why I want to extract value, make money for this better future, and I think that's like a mindset people have to have. Otherwise, they're going to burn out, or at some point, the money will mean nothing to them and they'll like just like lose it all. I think I've seen that like last cycle where these people exist, they have a lot of money, they're like not happy individuals, and they just blow it all away because it doesn't really matter for them. Like yeah,
Yeah,
it's pretty
there's
sad.
a lot of there's a lot of nihilism in our space. There's a lot of drug substance abuse in our space. There's a lot of uh, exorbitant amounts of spending in our space that like shouldn't be glorified, and it's not a good thing. And I think, especially the people selling this kind of stuff, I would say, really need to kind of tone it down because ultimately it just ends up in the hands of you're really polluting the kind of the younger folks that are looking up to you in the space, which they do, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I guess at the end of the cycle, you're not buying a Lambo.
Uh, Soon TM, I don't know.
Soon TM,
We'll
soon
see.
TM. We'll see. All right, well, thank you, Zahira, and I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation. And what's your Twitter, by the way?
At Split Capital.
All right, and I'll provide a link in the description below. All right, thank you, Zahir, and have a nice
Thanks,
day.
guys.